Next up, I'd like to introduce to you our MPP of Ajax, Rod Phillips.
I'm just really honored to have the chance to be here. I won't be too long. There's so many things going on in and around Ajax and Durham that I'm going to have to slip out because there's a couple other events tonight. But I wanted to be here first because I wanted to be here at the inaugural event for this really exciting effort. And I wanted to pick up a little bit from where the Reverend left off in terms of this issue of mental health, mental illness, and the importance of silence. I became very involved in this issue about 15 years ago because of some things in my life. And I got involved in terms of raising money for the Center for Addiction and Mental Health and speaking about mental health. And I have a story. It's a positive story about a difficult topic, mental health. But when I started 15 years ago, there was a gentleman who got me involved. He's a man named Michael Wilson, who was the finance minister of Canada. It's ironic because I'm now, in addition to being the MPP from Ajax, I'm the finance minister here in Ontario. But Mr. Wilson was involved because of his son's tragic death, and he would go out and speak about mental health and mental illness to crowds, and he couldn't do that all the time because he was a very busy man, and so he asked me to do that, and he gave me a couple of tips to do that. And probably over the last 15 years I've spoken on 60, 70 occasions to groups about mental health and mental illness. But the hopeful story, and there's a lot of them when it comes to this, was something that he taught me. He said, you know, when you're a speaker, as the Reverend would know, sometimes there's little tips that people give you. And he said, you know, what you should do is at the beginning of a speech, ask everybody to put up their hand who knows anybody who's been affected by mental illness. And so I would do that. And in a room this big, I'd probably have, I'd say, 35 or 40 people. This would be 15 years ago when people weren't as open to talking about it. But 35 or 40 people would put up their hand and say they knew somebody who'd been affected by mental illness. And then I'd ask a second question. I said, how many people in the room have ever suffered from mental illness? And 15 years ago, nobody would put up their hand. Now, the point of that when I was speaking was to say that those two things can't be true. It can't be true that we know somebody and that we all have met somebody, but that it's never happened to us. And the really hopeful part about that story is over the last decade and a half, when I've had the chance to give these speeches, the number of people, first of all, the number of people who've said they know somebody, if I asked that question today in the room, I bet almost everybody would here put their hand up. And if I asked the second question, I bet a lot of other people would put their hand up as well and be willing to talk about it. And I think that's, Reverend, a really hopeful story about the fact that people across not just the Caribbean community, but all of our communities are more and more willing and able to talk about this issue and to get the problems out on the table so the solutions can get on the table. Now I'm here as well with my friend Ashmeet Khan, who you heard he's a counselor. I'm sure he'll be speaking later. But as Ash knows, we are doing a lot of things in terms of the government. We're putting $3.8 billion, it's more money that's ever been spent, into supporting mental health and supports for mental illness. And that is meant very much to support the work of groups like the one you're here to support tonight. It's meant to connect into the community, make sure that there are the supports out there in the health system, but none of that happens, and I've learned this firsthand, without the exceptional work of groups like this foundation that are focused on making sure that the help is accessible, that the conversation can happen, that people know where to go and that they know where to turn. So again, Brian, Jason, Shane, I talked to a number of the organizers. Thank you on behalf of all of us in the Ajax community, in the Durham community. Thank you on behalf of the Ontario government. It is a fundraiser, so Jason said to make sure you open your wallets and help out and put some money on the table for a very valuable charity and a very valuable cause, and something that's really going to make a difference in the lives of people in Ajax, in Durham, and maybe someday around the world. I love that vision. So Brian, thank you for the invitation tonight. Thank you.